Good morning, everyone. I want to start with a personal story that our guest has not heard.
Okay.
But it does pertain to insurance, not Allstate, but to insurance.
All right.
17 years ago, we had a second home in Florida. So second home, by definition, primary is up here.
Okay.
Secondary is in Florida. And because it's secondary, it's not rented out. As you'll see, there's a significance to this insurance-wise in a moment.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah.
And at 6:30 in the morning, I get a call from fire marshal, and that I need to go down there right away.
Okay.
Because some people, presumably guys, had broken in, partied, drank our booze, and on the way out, sprinkled some gasoline and tossed a cigarette butt in what was a luxury house in a golf course neighborhood was reduced essentially to ash. And that's for the first time in my life when I learned to read the insurance policy and what my coverages were and what the exclusions were, and what I missed by not having a personal insurance agent as opposed to an anonymous person on an 800 number, God knows where.
Yeah. So what happened? Did you file a claim? Did you get covered?
There were significant exclusions, and we'll get to that in a second.
Okay, sorry. Yeah.
Okay, but I have to introduce you first. So,
Sure.
My name is Andy Norton. I am a realtor with Sampson Properties in Tyson's Corner, and our esteemed guest this morning is Christine Angles, who owns an Allstate franchise in Manassas, Virginia. Did I say that correctly?
Yeah, an Allstate agency. Yeah. So
Allstate agency.
Exactly.
Okay.
And then so we're licensed in Virginia, Maryland, D.C., and West Virginia.
And West Virginia.
Yep.
And for purposes of this video, not Florida, so that she's off the hook for everything that we happen to talk about. And so, in any case, I learned about what was then called ALE for additional living expense if it had been a primary, but it wasn't. And also, are there still lost rents coverages on investment properties? So if you have it rented out,
Exactly. So there's lots of potential there. So I'm assuming you were covered for this, for at least for like the damage of the house. Am I?
Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
But you're right. Like if it was a rental, then you would want coverage for lost rent. If it was your primary, you'd want costs for ALE, additional living expense, because we'd have to rent a house to put you in while it was being rebuilt. Yeah.
Right. But in this particular case, there was neither.
Okay.
And there was a mortgage on the property. And southern cities like Florida are not like Washington, where things get rebuilt really quickly.
No.
And it's just dragged on and on. And so like a year and a half of making mortgage payments, Yes. So, and that's when I learned about all these different coverages. Okay. So, I guess to start, I think that, do you want to start with homeowners?
Let's do it.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, because that's probably one of the major lines you carry.
Absolutely.
Okay. So a lot of the home buyers that I deal with have the attitude that there's no difference from insurance company 1 to 2 to 3. And whatever's cheaper is better, and just be done with it.
Yeah, no, we run into that a lot. And especially a lot of people don't, like you said, don't read the coverages. They also don't read like their deductibles. Some people say, well, it's really cheap, but they end up with a $10,000 deductible. And then when they go to file a claim, they have this surprising situation where they don't have,
Yes, all the above. So I guess for starters, if a home buyer is given 3 different insurance companies, let's say one of the ones that advertises all day, every day on the TV, and you can't get away from their ads.
Right.
That's one. And there's an 800 number, and you call up and you get an unknown person at the end of the 800 line. That's one. And as you know, there are also these insurance companies that are so tiny that no one's ever even heard of them, but they're still there.
I do see that. And then you're like, what if it's not there 20 years later when you file a claim, or you can't get someone when you have an issue? So that's, I do worry about that for that reason.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then they call Christine. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Can you explain what I'll call a service difference that a home buyer would discern when they get you on the phone? I mean, you're interviewing them?
Right. So sure. So I would say you get two things with a big company and a local agency, right? Because you want a 24-hour support. You want when you have a claim middle of the night, you have someone to call. So you want a big name, someone who's not going to go out of business, someone who's going to be there, and you know that they have like their claim service is critical to their business because everyone hears about them. You're going to be online. So Allstate, good name. But I would say up front, when you are looking at your own policy and investigating, having someone to talk to first set up your policy, you want to go through what is important to you. Do you live there? Do you rent it out to others occasionally? That's because there's like a little, you can add or not add. Lots of people rent out their houses temporarily or rent back to the previous owner. So those kind of things. So you want someone to talk to you about your stuff. Like, do you have special jewelry you want coverage? Do you have, what kind of, you got to use your home? So that's the kind of interview we would go through. And then also I find not just setting up your policy, but sometimes when people have a potential claim, they will call us and say, Christine, I have this issue at my house. Is this a claim? Should I file it? And I think that's really important, having a local agency that you can call who will say, well, it doesn't really make sense to have it on your record because it's tiny or it's not covered. But if you have a big issue or catastrophe, you should absolutely file it. So having that upfront, making sure your needs are met, and then having that secondary, should I file a claim call? Like, that's a really important call to make to keep your claim history clean from things that really shouldn't have been on there to begin. Does that make sense?
It not only makes sense, so it makes a difference. They get you when they're initiating the policy.
Right.
But if there's a claim, they're also calling you.
Exactly. So I would say 24 hours, middle of the night, we have 24-hour service. But if anyone's like, well, is this, that's the kind of thing where, catastrophe, my house is on fire. I have to call immediately, right? And then you were saying, get safe, and we'll figure out the money later. But the question is, something happens during the day, and you have an issue, you would call our office. So it's myself, I have a team of 10 people, we're all licensed, where everyone is, really ready to give that kind of guidance. Should I not file a claim?
Right.
And I think it's important. Sometimes I have people who haven't gotten that guidance, and they're going to buy a new house, and they're not insurable. So, as a realtor, that's pretty important that the person that you're selling a house to can get a new policy.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay, so speaking of the record, should they file the claim? Because people sometimes say that Andy doesn't have a clue. Okay. Are there still clue reports?
Good question. He knows his stuff here, this Andy. Clue report, yes. So that's your loss history report. It's going to show what claims are on your record. And I thought where you were going with a secondary home was like claims on your primary home count and secondary home will count towards that home versus rental property is kind of a separate bucket. So we'll see that, and that's where I thought you were originally going with your story, but absolutely you're running a loss history report or clue report to see what have you filed in the past.
Yeah, and by the way, clue is comprehensive loss.
So I'm really bad about acronyms. I talk in like things like your loss history, your history of losses. So when I talk to people, I try not to use acronyms. I try not to use things like HO6 or HO4. I just say your home policy, your condo policy. So that's just, I feel like that's, I don't know.
Yeah,
that's my thought.
And that's a good thought, which is another thing. If people glaze over, I think, with the HO4, the HO6, and they look at their declaration page, and they don't know what they're looking at. So, to explain it in human terms is a huge thing.
I agree.
Okay. So, and incidentally, with respect to the Florida, because it was arson, right? I mean, this has nothing to do with insurance. We'll get back to insurance.
Well, it's interesting. I think these kind of things, when it's a specific kind of situation, that's when insurance becomes interesting, when it's a real situation.
Yeah. So, but arson is a crime, and a crime needs to be investigated.
Right.
And so, I mean, if the fire marshal ever sees this, God bless you. I know you have a job to do. But one of the people who's investigated is the owner.
Well, that makes sense. I mean, you could see that. I mean, obviously, you even see that like on movies, right? That people burn their house to get insurance, or kill their husband to get insurance. Like, this is things that people do.
That's right.
So we do have to check. Yeah.
Yes. So I found myself a suspect, and of course had to retain legal counsel.
Oh my gosh.
I mean, because if they're going to investigate you for that, that's not a misdemeanor. That's a big deal.
It's a big deal.
Yeah. And so, and even back then it was $400 an hour. But there's nothing to do with but another thing that I ran into in Florida now, having to do with insurance and claims. So I have a rental property there.
Okay.
And the insurance company, they didn't cancel the policy, they non-renewed it because the roof was older than 15 years. Does that happen here too?
Well, 15 seems a little bit low, but like Florida is totally different than anywhere else because the storms are like, you know what I'm saying? There's always storms. So insurance in Florida, super expensive, a lot of risk, a lot of potential for risk depending on where it is, near the beach and things like that. But 15 years seems a little tight, but yes, you could see something not renewed if something's in disrepair. So when you're getting home insurance, there will generally be at least an online inspection, to make sure everything's up to snuff. And usually it's something that's fixable. Like if you have mold on your house or missing shingles, you have to fix that to have insured because no one's going to insure a risk that is just sitting out there ready to get damaged. You know what I'm saying?
Yes,
so
begging for a claim.
Yeah, exactly.
Yes.
Right.
Okay. So speaking of claims, I wanted to ask, industry-wide, because of either COVID or inflation, are the cost of claims going up significantly and the cost of policy renewals going up significantly?
Yeah, actually we're in a really high spot where everything's going up. So COVID was a big deal, cost of to rebuild homes and the materials, cost of labor has gone up. So that's gone up considerably. So home insurance, car insurance, it's all going up. A lot also because people don't realize, like when you see medical bills go up, then claims go up, and because that goes up, also people are suing each other more than ever. So the combination of the values of homes, having the cost to rebuild going up, the cost of medical bills going up. So when you file a claim and someone got injured, that expense is higher.
Yes.
And also people suing each other, so your liability going up. We are seeing an increase in insurance industry-wide.
In Florida, and let me ask if this happens in the Washington area,
Sure.
Is Allstate actually getting out of the business on certain lines of insurance where the claims tend to be particularly high? Like, would you not be insuring homes in Tidewater because it's on the ocean or anything like that?
Good question. And so sometimes in Florida, you're right. Like, there's like really evaluating, can we be in business here because of what the state insurance lets you charge for that and what's the risk. Yeah. So here, what we're seeing right now more is a car thing. I don't know if you've seen on TikTok, Kia and Hyundais are being stolen left and right. Someone posted videos. Here's how to steal a Kia. So right now, we're not adding more Kias and Hyundais to the Allstate policies because it's just like, please come and steal these cars. And so we're working out, like they're fixing it, and we're working out how to price it based on this additional risk. So we're kind of having a little pause on that. So that's currently happening, but right now with homes in Virginia and this area, we don't really have restrictions.
Okay, it's relatively stable, inflation notwithstanding.
Correct.
Okay. So we spoke about homeowners insurance. What about renters insurance? I mean, in the standard Northern Virginia lease, it does say that the tenant should get tenant's insurance, but a lot of times they don't. You sell tenant insurance.
Sure, and so I would say, if I was someone who owned a property that rented out, I would absolutely require renter's insurance, and then I would also say add me as an additional insured or an interested party. And the reason is if you're added as an interested party, if the person stops paying it, you would get a notification. So some people will, right, does that make sense? So some people will say, oh yes, I need, require insurance, I give them the deck page, they show it to the manager, and they move on, but then they stop paying, and the manager is none the wiser. So I would require, as someone who owns a property, and most apartment buildings require it, and they put their management on, and they're keeping up with it for that reason. Yeah. So I would say yes. We do. Renter's insurance covers your stuff. It also covers your liability if you damage any other units in your apartment or the landlord's property if you cause damage to others. So that's pretty important. Besides covering, people are like, well, I don't have anything. Well, you probably have something.
Yeah.
And also liability causing damage to others is really a potential for problems.
So if the tenant damages the property and there is no insurance that the tenant's taken out, it falls on the landlord.
Correct. And so that's a lot of reason too, like if you're in a building, they'll almost always require renters, because what if they have, do something stupid or just accidental, I shouldn't say stupid, and it causes damage to the units next, up and below and
Yes.
next door.
Like a flood.
Exactly.
Yes, which actually happened in our condominium with water damage that went down through 9 stories.
Now I will say flood and water damage is a little different. So I don't want to say, I said yes for flood, but really I should say water damage. Because a flood is a flood.
Yeah, a flood is an act of God, nature.
Exactly, right. So a flood is like,
Noah's
has
Ark.
a definition of like a certain amount of property, a certain amount of units, like underwater, yeah.
Yes,
Okay.
right. That's a flood, as
Okay.
opposed to negligence and a leak.
Right.
Okay. Talking about auto insurance, because there are a lot of people watching this who the population is aging, so their kids are getting of an age where they're starting to drive. Do you find that, so are parents insuring the young adults when they first start to drive, or do you see most parents saying you're not driving until you can afford your own coverage?
I would say like 95% of the time the teenage kids are on the parents' policy. It's much more cost effective to have the kids on the parents' policy than to have their own policy, at least for the first few years. The parents have like a history of insurance. The kids don't. It's going to be much more expensive. So I think within the family, if they want the child to pay for that, they will just say, well, it went up by this much and you have to like get a job to pay us this. So I think it would be an inside the family conversation.
So I don't know if my intuition would say that the parents, because they have a lifetime of driving experience every day, would have lower claims. And that teenagers, but they've taken driver's ed more recently, and I would think that a teenager would be more cautious, but no.
Good question. Yeah, no, teens new drivers, especially teens, get into a lot of accidents.
Okay.
And then so really, I would say like collision, so damage to your own car, that's your fault from an accident, that happens a lot with new drivers. And so that'll be higher. I would say if you want to keep your costs down and you have a teen driver, don't get them a car. Just let them borrow your cars sometimes. Or get a car that doesn't cost that much to fix. I see people who are getting a brand new car, buying an Audi for their teenager and wondering why it's so expensive. Get like something that you can bang out the dents, like a pickup or something, or a safe car, but that's not going to be so much too expensive, and that would keep the cost down. Yeah.
And in an affluent area, such as ours, you probably see parents who are giving their kids Audis.
We do see it.
Yes. Although I take it you did not give your kids an Audi.
No, but and also you also get discounts for having good grades. So if a kid has good grades, or if your kid's away at college without a car, if let's see, if they take like a Teen Smart Safe Driving course, which I made my kids take as guinea pigs for the teens in the area. Yeah.
Okay. So, do you have a favorite line of insurance that you sell? Or conversely, is there one that you just, when somebody approaches you, you say, oh my God, no, not another?
Oh, good question. I think the most important conversation I have with people is about liability insurance. So I think I love to talk to people about umbrella policies, because so many people, particularly in an affluent area like this, don't know that they should have higher liability coverage. So I'll have someone buying $1 million home or a $600,000 home, and they'll have state minimum liability coverage on their auto insurance. What does that mean? They hit someone, there's medical bills, they get sued, and their insurance would pay $30,000, and they would be left with hundreds of thousands of dollars, and they could lose their new house. So I would say the liability conversation, and should you consider, based on what you have to lose, should you have a personal umbrella policy with extended liability? That's my favorite conversation, because I think it's so important that people have it.
And in that regard, so because I have rental properties and I wanted to put them into LLCs, and my CPA said, no, you can insure over the risk on a rental property by having an umbrella policy with with a good high coverage limit.
Agreed. So you could have a certain number of like rental properties, and then you could have in your name, and then add the liability, like transfer the risk to your insurance company by having an extended liability policy. That makes sense. Yeah.
Okay. So my CPA was right.
I agree.
Okay.
Yeah.
Is there a kind of insurance that you really kind of dislike? Either it's not well understood or...
Yeah, I mean, I'm happy to talk about it. I think condo insurance becomes very complicated for people to understand because they're like, well, who covers what? So condos are kind of complicated. I don't mind talking about it, but it's hard sometimes to have people understand because there's limits such as building property protection, which would be any upgrades to the condo unit since it was created by you or any other owner. That's kind of odd. So I think it's hard for people to wrap their hands around what that limit is, and so I think that's just a conversation I want to make sure people understand. Not so simple. Yeah.
Let's switch to life insurance for a second, which is, there is this saying that you begin with the end in mind a lot. But with life insurance, if you begin with the end in mind, people really don't want to think about that.
Yeah, and I should have said, when you said, what do you like to talk about? I mean, life insurance is so important. So I think umbrella policies, life insurance, these are life-changing situations, right? So people talk about their deductible, should it be $250, should it be $500, should it be $1,000? That's a personal choice. I don't feel like it's life-changing. Not having life insurance when you have a family, when you have a home, that could be devastating. So like I say, I would agree, you don't want to talk about it. It's super important to make sure you have it and get that settled so that if people depend on you, that there's something to fall back on.
Okay. So, in a more macro sense on life insurance, I had read, I don't know if this is true, but it sounded intuitively true, that the fastest growing poverty group in America are widows over the age of 60.
Yeah, I'm not surprised. I'm actually not surprised. And so a lot of people, particularly because a lot of people will have a pension or don't, or their husband dies early, they're planning on them working some more. So life insurance is not just for people with kids, it's not just for the young, although I do think young people, it's great to lock in life insurance rates when you're young because you're healthy. People are like, well, I'll get it later. I'm like, well, now you can get a great rate, lock it in, and have something that you have for a lifetime, because who wants to have or think about their spouse living in poverty? That's not your plan. Like
well, okay, it's not the plan, but in a way, this is foreseeable in the following sense.
Right.
That if you agree that very often women tend to marry guys who are older, okay, and because older people tend to die before younger people tend to, and if the wife stays home raising kids, she's sacrificing certain years on her career while the husband is building his career. So even if she goes back to work, generally speaking, she's not going to have the earning power that the husband may have had. So because women live longer than men anyway, when the husband dies, even if there is life insurance, given that rambling
No, I see what you're saying.
Is it
you're
fair
right,
to say that
right.
most guys are underinsured?
I would say, and so a lot of times, I would say the conversation to have about life insurance with the family is not just the husband, but the wife as well, because she's the one who should have this in mind. Like, what if this happens to me? Like, I'm now home with my kids, or even if people worry about till my kids are older, but what about after that? Agreed. Like, what about after that? If you don't have, retirement savings for your whole life, you could be in a situation, so prepare for it. I agree.
So like if the husband, God forbid, dies of a heart attack at 68, and the wife lives to 98, is there going to be money for that?
Yeah, no, I mean, you could, make a financial plan, have a meeting and say, what do we have, what do we need, and figure out, we have lots of solutions from like term life insurance we talked about, or permanent insurance. There's lots of ways to make sure you have something set up for that.
Yeah. So another mistake that Andy made, having to do with life insurance. So like 30 years ago was a long time ago. 30 years ago I was young. I thought, A, I'm not going to die, and B, I'm going to live forever. That was
Right.
30 years ago. So instead of getting either whole life or variable or something like that, I got term insurance. But I'm now, and it was a great deal. It's before you got into insurance, Christine. And okay, it was a great deal. But it was for 30-year level term. But I'm now 21 years into a 30-year policy, and in only 9 more years, it's going to go away, and I'm not really insurable.
Well, what the good thing about that is, and the reason why I tell people to lock in term insurance, is that usually you could convert your term policy to a permanent policy without doing an additional medical exam. I did that myself.
Okay.
And so that's why I say get it and get that rate locked in. Because if you have an illness or you happen to get old, surprisingly, and like things change, weight changes, blood pressure changes, you have something to convert and save that rating.
Correct.
So, yeah.
So before we run out of time, one of the things I was wondering about, with technology just sweeping over the world and changes in everything, is the insurance industry being impacted by any particular changes like artificial intelligence, or is there anything, when you look over the horizon at the insurance industry, are there things that you need to be aware of insurance-wise?
Well, I think it's how we work with our customers. Like, people used to do everything by phone or everything in person. Now, so much more. You can file a claim on your phone. You can just take pictures and get the how much it's going to be to replace your car, fix your car. So we are working a lot with the technology on making it easy for people to interact with us. And probably the biggest thing coming up, though, is I would say your particular way that you drive will become more of a factor down the road, specifically years later. So I would say that makes some sense.
Drive carefully.
Yeah.
Yes. Or maybe we'll have autonomous driving and we won't need to worry about
Fran, yeah.
Yes. So when you have the phone number there to contact Christine Engels at 703-330-9400, and we would like to thank everybody this morning for joining us, and this will be on YouTube within a few days, and this will be a keeper because most people really don't know about the ins and outs and different kinds of policies and coverages and all the rest of it.
Yeah, well, I appreciate you inviting me, Andy. This has been really fantastic. You're a great host. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Until next week, folks. Bye now.